From husband of four to husband of one. The line itself reads like the introduction to a melodramatic movie preview, but this is life, not fiction. It is the tale of Kody Brown, a man who once appeared before TV cameras as the self-proclaimed head of America's most prominent polygamous family. For more than a decade, millions of viewers watched him on TLC's Sister Wives, thinking they were seeing the story of something greater than the average love, a family united by faith, devotion, and togetherness. To some, it seemed like a daring experiment in redefining what marriage might look like. To others, it was a captivating, sometimes perplexing glimpse into a way of life usually kept behind closed doors. But what began as a dream, with laughter, children, and the promise of being together, gradually frayed into something far more sinister. What audiences really saw over the years was not so much love. It was jealousy, heartbreak, resentment, and betrayal, one episode at a time, until the whole family collapsed. When cameras first rolled in 2010, the Brown family was notable for one reason alone: they were going to expose the world to something it had never seen. Polygamy was at that point hidden away, spoken of in hushed tones, or hyped up in salacious headlines. But here was Kody Brown, standing tall with four women who each called him husband. There was the first wife, Meri, who had been around from the start and contributed to building the family. There was the second wife, Janelle, who was a practical, cool-headed, self-sufficient woman, and the quiet backbone of the family. And then there was Christine, the third wife, who infused warmth, humor, and an intense commitment to child-rearing. And lastly there was Robyn, the fourth and youngest wife, whose introduction to the family brought both hope and, ultimately, pandemonium. Initially, the image they presented seemed too perfect to be real. They were good-looking, laughing together, raising kids in a chaotic household that was managed looking chaos on television. Vacations, family nights, and birthdays were filled with smiling faces. The Browns wanted to show the audience that their lives weren't dominated by misery or oppression, but rather by agency, choice, and love. And for a time, the world thought so too. Ratings skyrocketed, and the family was reality TV stars overnight. But beneath the facade of those initial shows, even before viewers realized, the cracks were beginning to form. Because no matter how hard you smile for the TV cameras, jealousy is bound to find its way through the cracks, and in a home where one man is shared by four women, feelings were sure to clash. Kody portrayed himself as a leader, the one person who was to guide not just his wives but their numerous children. He talked confidently of fairness, of loving each wife equally, of the duty of plural marriage. But as the seasons went on, viewers could pick up on little things, slight favoritism, variations in body language, and how his focus began to lean more heavily upon one wife than the others. Robyn, the latest addition, was taking up more and more of his time, his energy, and his heart. At first it seemed like the thrill of a new romance, but as the years went by, that thrill never seemed to wane. It deepened into a bond that the other wives could not dismiss. Christine would go on to tell in interviews that she felt she lost her husband the minute Robyn came into the family. Meri, who was the most tight-knit with Kody before Robyn's arrival, felt isolated and unwanted. Janelle, quieter about her feelings, confessed to feeling pushed aside. And throughout it all, Kody maintained that he was just following his heart, doing the best he could to maintain the titanic balance of 4 marriages and almost 24 kids. As the seasons of Sister Wives went on, tension gradually became the show's focus. What was originally sold as a tale of love and harmony was increasingly appearing to be a tale of strife, of women vying for attention, of children in the middle, and of a man trying to hold on to power. Audiences who once respected Kody began to judge him. Some blamed him for arrogance, others for self-centeredness. The same man who sought to demonstrate that plural marriage had to be fair and balanced was now being perceived as a husband who had forsaken fairness entirely. The saddest aspect of the tale is how very public the breakdown was. Unlike normal families, who can work out their issues in secret, the Browns' issues unfolded on national TV. Millions of people witnessed Christine finally snap and walk out, saying in 2021 that she was through. Millions of people witnessed Janelle, formerly passionately devoted, say in 2022 that she could no longer remain in a marriage of disrespect. Millions listened as Meri confessed in 2023 that her marriage was through, her relationship with Kody irreparably broken. And all the while, the cameras continued to roll, recording each of the tears, each of the arguments, each of the silent moments of disillusionment. The man who was once the proud husband of four now stood alone with only one at his side. Robyn? Some felt sorry for him and said he was a man under impossible strain. Others contended that his fall was of his own making, that his favoritism, his obstinacy, and his refusal to listen to his wives had ruined all that he had constructed. Whatever the reality, the perception of Kody Brown, surrounded by a contented together family, had been destroyed forever. What is so compelling about this tale is not the drama of a family's dissolution, it is the greater lesson buried within it. Love, however majestic, will not endure unless there is respect. Unity, however robust, cannot exist if only one individual is being given first priority. And a family, however big, will fall if its roots are planted in uneven soil. Kody Brown's path is surprising not because it is scandal-ridden, but because it is full of truth. It is the truth of human emotion, the truth of jealousy, the truth of shattered promises. For years he attempted to make the world believe he could love equally, that he could rule equally, that he could be the man who made polygamy a viable reality. But ultimately the reality was too great to conceal. He was a four-husband man who turned into a husband of one. And that transition, acted out before millions of viewers, is one of the most compelling tales in the annals of reality television. When Sister Wives first aired in 2010, it seemed as though reality TV had landed on something quite new. Audiences were accustomed to programming about dating, cooking shows, or housewives bickering in mansions. But here on their televisions was something both familiar and strange. A family, not a couple with some children, but a large, untraditional family united by a practice most people only knew of in whispers or in rumors. At the center of it all was Kody Brown, a man with a big smile, long blonde hair, and a personality that filled every room. He was energetic, playful, and perpetually charismatic, the kind of guy who lived for cameras. Surrounding him were three women who had been with him for years: Meri, Janelle, and Christine. Each of them with her own story, her own personality, her own dynamic with Kody. And then there was Robyn, the newest wife, who brought an instant separateness to this family from anything television had previously presented. Millions of people were watching for the first time what a polygamous family was like, not in theory, not in gossip, but in reality. They saw Meri, the first wife, frequently shouldering the burden of being the first, the one who had said yes to sharing a husband. They observed Janelle, self-sufficient and down-to-earth, juggling money, careers, and the constant arrangements of a family so large it felt like a village. Christine added warmth and humor, laughter illuminating moments even when the pressure of plural marriage was crushing. And Robyn, younger and more recent, added not just new dynamism, but the unmistakable strain of being the pet, whether she liked it or not. The series wasn't about four women and one man. It was about kids. So many kids. Babies stumbling through kitchens, teenagers rolling their eyes in family meetings, children bonding with one another across the branches of this enormous family tree. To audience members who had grown up in smaller families, it was amazing and touching to watch these children mix and refer to one another as brothers and sisters even though they hadn't been born of the same mother. The Brown home was filled with pandemonium, birthday parties, family meals, fights over household chores, all-night discussions about love, religion, and sacrifice. And despite it all, the Browns sent one resounding message: this way of life worked. They needed to show America that polygamy wasn't a sinful secret hidden in desert cities. They needed to present it as a decision, a lifestyle based on faith, dedication, and the premise that love could grow to accommodate more than two individuals. During the first few seasons, that message resonated. People were intrigued. Some were appalled, sure, but many were intrigued, even sympathetic. The Browns became overnight celebrities. Interviews, magazine covers, news stories, they were everywhere. Reality television, however, has the effect of stripping away layers, of making people reveal more than they intended. Early on, the Browns appeared united, all smiles and common goals. But gradually, the show uncovered what life was like behind the scenes of a plural marriage, the sacrifices, the jealousies, the sleepless nights. Meri, who had been assured initially of being the first wife, started revealing her difficulties, her yearning for additional time and affection. Janelle admitted sometimes finding it less complicated to live separately from the group, attending to her career and her independence. Christine admitted to having profound insecurities, sentiments that she wasn't as loved or valued as others. And Robyn, who tried her best to fit in, became the focus of anger, the unofficial emblem of disequilibrium in an egalitarian system. It was astounding to outsiders. Here was this family who had professed love with no bounds, and yet each wife, in her own method, was fighting within her the boundaries of sharing one man's heart. And Kody, at the center of it all, grasping for it all to come together, attempting to spin the facade of equality even as his actions screamed where his heart really was. But in those early years, when the unraveling hadn't yet reached a point where it was impossible to conceal, there was still a glimmer of hope. The Browns envisioned a future when they could all live on one property, each wife in her own house, side by side like limbs of the same tree. They spoke of constructing, not merely houses but a legacy, an enclave where children could grow up amidst concordance. Kody, ever the salesman of fantasies, painted rich portraits of how things would be when the family's dream became a reality. And for a time, they did believe him. They wanted to believe. They wanted to witness a tale of love prevailing over jealousy, of unity conquering division, of faith being able to sustain something so complex and delicate. The Browns were not only a TV family, they became symbols of potentiality, evidence that maybe, just perhaps, non-traditional families could succeed in this new world. But as every tale teaches us, looks are misleading. What appeared to be togetherness was already concealing cracks. What appeared to be solidity was already creaking under strain. What seemed to be love was already distorting into competitiveness. The Browns had flung open their doors, and with them they had admitted everyone not just to share in their triumphs, but to bear witness to their defeats. And in the years to come, those defeats would be impossible to overlook. When Robyn entered the Brown household, everything was altered. Initially, it appeared as a new beginning, a shot in the arm of fresh life. She was younger than the other wives, cooler, and possessed a combination of confidence and vulnerability that placed her squarely in the spotlight of viewers from day one. For Kody, it was irresistible. He grinned bigger when she was around. His body moved closer. His laughter was more natural, and the cameras caught it all. To outsiders, it seemed like the excitement of a new relationship, the type of honeymoon period every couple endures. But for a plural marriage, that honeymoon has a price tag. The other wives, who had already spent decades creating lives with Kody, now were forced to stand by as he lavished his attention on someone new. Christine acknowledged that on the day that Robyn came to live with the family, she experienced something within herself give way. She explained it was as if her husband had been stripped away from her, despite the fact that in reality he was still present. Meri, as the original wife and who had known the intimacy no one else had, found herself getting pushed to the side. Even Janelle, who generally attempted to remain practical and aloof, saw the change. So did viewers. They saw Kody's visits with Robyn take longer, his love for her more relaxed, more intense. With the other wives he was respectful but reserved. With Robyn he was forthcoming, playful, almost a young man in love for the first time. The imbalance was slight at first, but it became increasingly difficult to brush off. Each look, each touch, each laugh became evidence that Robyn wasn't just another wife, she was the wife. And then there was the issue of her children. Robyn brought children from her previous relationship into the marriage, and Kody welcomed them as his own. He went as far as to formally adopt them, something that necessitated him divorcing his first wife, Meri, so that he could wed Robyn in name. It was meant to be a legal technicality, but the symbolism was terrible. For Meri, the woman who had stood by his side from the start, the divorce was not merely paperwork. It was the unwinding of her position in his heart. For Robyn, it was security, validation, and permanence. Again, the family asserted that they were one, But the reality was obvious. Robyn was becoming the center, and everyone else was revolving around her. The tension wasn't merely emotional, it was spiritual. The Browns had traditionally presented their plural marriage as a point of faith, a call from God. But faith required equality, and equality was no longer apparent. The other wives started wondering if Kody's love for Robyn was eroding all they had given up for. Plural marriage wasn't supposed to be about favorites or romance. It was supposed to be about balance, about dividing love and duty equally. But once the balance had shifted so far in one direction, the whole thing started to topple. There were endless debates among show fans online. Some said Kody was just in love and could not control his emotions. Others were outraged with him as a betrayer, as someone who had failed the very tenets he espoused. Robyn herself became divisive. Some viewers perceived her as manipulative, a woman who understood precisely how to maintain Kody's attention. Others came to her defense, stating she was unfairly held accountable for issues that had been festering well before she came on the scene. But within the family, perception was reality. And the perception, both to the wives and to the world, was that Robyn was the new favorite. For the kids, things were subtle but hurtful. They picked up where their dad spent most of his time. They saw who was getting more attention. They saw when birthdays or family milestones were drowned out by trips to Robyn's house. The formerly cohesive group of kids started feeling things from each other, invisible lines dividing those bonded with Robyn from those that weren't. What made this chapter of the story so powerful was how clearly it showed the fragility of plural marriage. One new addition, one shift in affection, one decision to prioritize one relationship above others, and suddenly decades of trust and sacrifice were called into question. Christine's laughter became less frequent. Meri's loneliness grew heavier. Janelle withdrew further into independence. And Kody, whether he acknowledged it or not, invested more of himself in Robyn, as if she alone was sustaining the dream. In fact, however, the dream was on its last legs. The audience could sense it, the wives sensed it, and deep inside even Kody had to know that something essential had shifted. The narrative of the Browns was no longer one of cohesion. It was now a narrative of imbalance. It was about the price of love, when love isn't evenly shared. And as Robyn moved more deeply into the family, what had once appeared to be a joyful experiment started to resemble a slow-motion implosion, one that would take years to fully disintegrate. The fantasy of being one giant harmonious family started to disintegrate far earlier than anyone uttered the D word. It began tentatively enough, veiled remarks, sideways glances, finishing sentences without a word. Gradually, though, the cracks got larger, until they were too blatant to overlook. Christine spoke aloud first, what everybody had been sensing for years. She didn't recognize her marriage anymore. She had loved Kody once, deeply, fiercely. She had believed in the doctrine of plural marriage, believed that love was divisible, that sacrifice was a blessing worth the cost of family. But with each year that went by, as she saw Kody give more and more time and attention to Robyn, her hope receded. Christine's vibrant laugh, the joy she brought to every moment, faded into tears and reflects of frustration. By 2021, she could no longer keep up the act. She folded her belongings, ended the marriage, and departed not only from Kody, but from the dream that all of them had vowed to have together. The news stunned viewers, but for the family, it was heartbreaking and impending. Christine had spoken candidly about her hurt for years. She owned up to her jealousy, acknowledged her loneliness, and openly wrestled with the fact that her husband did not desire to be with her anymore. Her departure was not a surprise plot turn. It was the inevitable end of a tale everyone had watched develop in slow motion. And yet, when it came, it had an electrifying impact on the family. One wife fewer, after a lifetime of self-denial, one branch of the family tree torn up by the roots. Kody responded in anger and defensiveness. He asserted Christine had broken her covenants, that she was the one abandoning the faith that they had constructed their lives around. He portrayed himself as betrayed and abandoned, as misunderstood. But underlying his words, spectators could discern the truth in what he was saying, in how his eyes moved, how his shoulders sagged. This wasn't about Christine leaving. This was about Kody losing command of the image he had struggled so desperately to keep up. Janelle was the next to falter. For years, she had been the independent wife, the one who didn't require constant attention, who worked on her children, her career, and her own endeavors. She sidestepped the drama, remained practical, and was willing to let Kody do what he wanted with his time. But Christine's exit made her realize things. If Christine, the glue that once kept them all together, could exit, then what was that saying about the marriage itself? Janelle gradually started to wonder if it was worth staying. By 2022, doubts converted into a conclusion. She too walked away, opting for her own peace and not a marriage that did not return her respect or love. When Janelle walked away, the cracks opened into canyons. She had been Kody's partner in logistics, the one who managed finances, the one who balanced practicality against Kody's big, often unrealistic dreams. Without her, the structure of the family began to wobble, and for the children, Christine's, Janelle's, and even Meri's, the exits became a rallying point. Increasing numbers of them spoke out, confessing they felt abandoned, neglected, forgotten by a father who poured every bit of himself into one wife and her kids. By the time Meri finally released him, the family was already broken. Hers had been a gradual fade, years of estrangement, isolation, and the pungency of that legal divorce that enabled Kody to wed Robyn. For years, she had clung to hope, holding on to the hope that someday Kody would return to her. But hope, if left to starve for long enough, ultimately meets its demise. In 2023, she validated what everyone knew all along. Her marriage was dead. And then there was one. Kody, who once proudly stood with 4 wives at his side, was reduced to Robyn alone, the man who had taught equality, fairness, and the virtue of plural marriage now existed in monogamy. The thing he once claimed was too confining, too small, and yet this was not choice monogamy. This was collapse monogamy, loss monogamy, rejection monogamy. The fans gazed in shock. How had the grand experiment gone so terribly wrong? How had the man who vowed to bring them together reduced it all to ashes? The reason was simple, yet agonizing. Love will not thrive where trust is lost, and unity will not thrive where partiality holds sway. For the ex-wives, departure was not merely flight. It was an act of recovery. Christine smiled again, her voice a joy to hear. She built a life where she was a part of the decision-making process. Janelle became independent, demonstrating her strength and resilience. Meri, having been hardened by years of isolation, started stepping into new horizons. Each of these women, in her own unique way, declared to the world that she was more than a wife in a plural marriage. She was an individual worthy of love, respect, and equality. And for Kody, the former proud patriarch, the fall was absolute. He protested that he had been cheated, that his wives had betrayed their faith, that they had surrendered too easily. But the viewers did not buy it. They saw a man who had given his soul to one, and allowed the others to wither. They looked at a man who had been blinded by pride, who had chosen image over intimacy, who had held on to control when it was slipping away from him. The family split was no longer a personal injury. It was public, ugly, and irreversible. What had been touted as a testament to strength now existed as a warning. The Browns had set out to show the world that polygamy was possible. What they had succeeded in showing was how easily it could shatter under the pressures of human feeling. On the outside, the narrative could appear as entertainment, a twisty, dramatic reality series full of tearful moments and fights. But for them, it was real. The cries were real. The fights were real. The isolation was real. And the loss, for all of them, was more profound than words could possibly capture. The dream of togetherness was gone. The Brown family, once united by faith and desire, was broken apart. And Kody Brown, once a husband of 4, stood alone with just one. The tale of Kody Brown would be impossible to tell without the inclusion of the children, for in a way they were the silent observers of it all. Behind every argument, every choice, every tear the wives cried, were sons and daughters watching it all go down. 18 kids who each have their own memories, their own scars, and their own tales of what it was like to have grown up in America's most well-known plural family. Initially, the children were a part of the magic. When Sister Wives first aired, audiences were won over by the pandemonium of having so many kids racing through hallways, arguing over chores, throwing birthday parties, and creating connections that seemed as robust as any conventional family. They weren't merely step-siblings. They were siblings in every way possible. They stood up for one another, joked with each other, and had a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood that at times seemed stronger than the marriages that were keeping the family together. For most fans, seeing the children grow up before their very eyes was the best part of the show. However, children pay attention to more than what grown-ups realize. They observe how their parents behave. They sense the tension present, the unspoken words around the dinner table, the subtle changes of focus. As Kody's favoritism of Robyn and her children became increasingly apparent, the other children sensed the disparity in agonizing ways. Some of them started talking about it openly. They told their father that they felt abandoned, as if he picked one family over all the rest. The feeling of equality Kody had once propagated could not be seen in their everyday life. Holiday gatherings were wars of allegiance. Birthdays that would be times of happiness sometimes came and went in disappointment when Kody failed to appear, or when his attendance was a distracted one. Graduations, milestones, ordinary school functions, all were accompanied by trepidation, whether their father would come, and if he came, if his heart was with them. For most of the older children, the response was no. They started to move away, forging their own roads from the limelight, and from the person they once admired. One of the most difficult realities that surfaced as the children matured was that a majority of them no longer felt close to their father. Some admitted that they hadn't communicated with him for months, even years. Others admitted that they felt their relationship with him had been irreparably broken. For them, the breakdown of the marriages wasn't only about their mothers. It was about themselves and their relationship with the man who was meant to protect and provide for them. The tension wasn't just between the father and children. It seeped into the relationships between siblings. Robyn's children, welcomed and claimed by Kody, were badges of his favoritism, whether or not they chose that role. Some of the other children resented it, feeling their father had substituted them with a new batch of children he preferred. Others simply took themselves out of the equation, figuring it was easier to say nothing than to struggle for attention they no longer thought they'd get. The formerly harmonious sibling group now bore unseen fault lines, forged by their origins and the degree to which they had access to their father's time. For Christine's children, her departure was more than a gesture of autonomy. It was a gesture of self-protection. She needed them to have a home life in which they saw their mother being valued, not dismissed. She hoped they would realize love should be caring, not conditional. In her interviews, she was frank about how her children should be able to see a healthier example, and leaving Kody was as much for them as it was for her. Janelle's kids also spoke up, some of them even arguing directly with their dad. They blamed him for favoritism, neglect, and shirking his duties as a parent. Those battles spilled onto the show, offering viewers an unvarnished glimpse of how deep the wounds had become. It wasn't about a broken marriage anymore. It was about broken families, about kids who felt betrayed by the man who vowed to be their rock. And then there were the children of Meri, who bore the silent sorrow of seeing their mother slip away into isolation. They witnessed the price it exacted on her. The way she continued waiting for Kody to come back, even when it was obvious that he never would. For them, the tale was one of perseverance and disappointment, a lesson in the risk of clinging too tightly to someone who won't let you hold her back. The weight of all these tales is more massive than reality TV. It is the tale of what occurs when promises to grown-ups get spilled on children's shoulders. They didn't pick plural marriage. They didn't select cameras. They didn't select divisions. But they experienced them all the same, bearing the load of broken trust and broken love. For the audience, listening to children's voices made the program from entertainment to something so much more serious. It was not just about wives abandoning their husband. It was about children growing up with a father who seemed distant, gone, or unjust. It was about the emotional price of a lifestyle that was sold to them as happy and rewarding, but that for too many left the youngest and most vulnerable feeling unremembered. Ultimately, the children emerged as some of the most effective storytellers of the Brown family drama. Through their speech, their quiet, and their decisions, they uncovered the real costs of the breakdown. They demonstrated that when a marriage falls apart so publicly, so messily, it doesn't only shatter the husbands and wives, it shatters the family tree, shattering the roots and rattling the branches for generations. And maybe that is the most chilling aspect of Kody Brown's tale. Not the broken marriages, not the land sold, not even the favoritism that killed the equality dream. The most chilling aspect is the voices of the children, who now discuss a father they feel that they have lost, when he remains alive, still on television, still claiming he did his best. Their hurt resounds more loudly than any gavel, more loudly than any fan's voice, more loudly than the defenses Kody continues to erect. Because when children declare they feel abandoned, the reality can no longer be concealed. The Brown children matured in the eyes of the world. They were symbols of a dream once, and now reminders of the reality for which dream came at a cost. These stories are the testimony of what occurs when love does not come equally, when promises are broken, when unity is not more than a fragile dream. They are the heart of the narrative, the evidence that behind the headlines and drama exists something exceedingly real, the long-lasting effect on the following generation. The Browns always said their show was about faith and love, but behind it all was the money driving the dream. 4 families meant 4 bills, 4 mortgages, 4 grocery carts, and an avalanche of expenses most families couldn't even dream about. When cameras were rolling and checks were coming in, it seemed doable. The program paid for the dream, and the dream paid for the program. But as the marriages broke down and allegiances changed, money became another fight, another hurt that never ached less. The Coyote Pass story was meant to be their comeback. Years of state-to-state migration, Utah to Nevada, Nevada to Arizona. The Browns had had enough. They craved stability. They desired one location where the whole family could settle roots, construct homes, and at last reside together. In 2018, they bought a large area of land in Flagstaff, Arizona, an expanse of flat desert with mountains on the horizon. For Kody, it was a dream. He talked of constructing houses for each of his wives, of having a common place where their children and grandchildren could celebrate for generations to come. It wasn't land, it was the promise of togetherness. Promises are easy. Building is difficult. Year by year, the land remained vacant. No houses were constructed, no foundations laid. The vision continued to be stuck in blueprints and disagreements. Some wives were reluctant to spend more money on a future that was already precarious. Christine, in particular, admitted she did not want to live on Coyote Pass, not when her marriage was falling apart and her faith in Kody was lost. Janelle clung longer, hoping that the land might still represent a new beginning. But even her forbearance started to lapse. Meri remained silent, wondering if her position within the family even earned her a place on the land. And Robyn, of course, became the focus again. To most it was clear that if and when the land got developed, Robyn's home would be first and largest. The land that once meant togetherness gradually became evidence of separation. Coyote Pass meetings concluded in disputes. Financial talks became accusations. The wives accused Kody of being irresponsible with money, of pursuing a dream that no one really believed in anymore. Kody, on his part, accused his wives of lack of faith, of not investing in the family's future. The harder he pushed, the harder they withdrew, and the land, empty and still, served as a mirror to reflect the truth. No unity to build upon. Secretly, financial difficulties stacked up. The show was lucrative, but sharing income between several households depleted the funds in short order. Medical expenses, college fees, the costs of daily living. It all mounted. Several of the wives earned to live for themselves, fashioning independent incomes to make ends meet. Janelle, being the no-nonsense one that she is, was concerned with money. Christine started building her own business deals. Meri put money into her bed and breakfast, attempting to create a life beyond Kody. Every wife managed to keep herself afloat in her own manner, but the autonomy only served to prove how broken the financial system was. What had previously been a single family budget now resembled four individual plans for survival. The cracks began to show to viewers. They wondered why the land lay idle, why Kody kept talking about big plans and nothing materialized. Internet bulletin boards were filled with speculation. Some speculated that the Browns simply couldn't afford to construct. Others believed that Kody was waiting, that the promise of Coyote Pass would hold on to the wives for just a bit longer. After all, if they lived in side-by-side houses, exiting would become a much more difficult proposition. For Christine, that was justification enough to walk away. She did not want to be stuck in a future that she did not believe in anymore. The most symbolic moment was when Kody himself confessed that the land had become bitter. He used to call it the key to keeping the family together, but in the end it was apparent that it was only driving them further apart. Each time the subject was broached, old wounds opened once more. Favoritism, jealousy, and mistrust overshadowed any promise of advancement. Coyote Pass was no longer a dream, but a ghost that haunted the family with what might have been. Money tends to expose the truth that people do not want others to know. For the Browns, money exposed that love was not enough to keep four households together, not when there was limited material to go around, and expectations were out of balance. Kody desired loyalty. The wives desired security. The children desired stability. No one received what they desired. Instead, everybody stood around and watched while the dream evaporated from their hands, leaving behind only unpaid bills and shattered promises. When Christine departed, the property was already a goner. Its greatest advocate, Janelle, finally came clean that she didn't see a future there either. Meri had no more cause to struggle for her stake, and Robyn, though still in the running technically, now stood on land that represented disappointment rather than promise. What they bought as the cornerstone of their legacy now stood as the marker of failure. The collapse of Coyote Pass is one of the most overt metaphors of the entire Brown family drama. They set out to create a kingdom where all could live and flourish together. But kingdoms are constructed upon trust, and trust had been shattered long ago. Regardless of how much property they had, no matter how many blueprints Kody held aloft, nothing could dispel the reality. The family was already lost. And maybe that is the reason Coyote Pass is still vacant. Because you cannot construct houses on land that is tainted with bitterness. You cannot lay foundations on earth already fissured with treachery. You cannot forge harmony where harmony is no longer. For viewers, the property became a character unto itself, an unspoken testament to the breakdown of the family. Each episode in which it appeared was a reminder of what the family had lost. Each fight over it was a testament to how low the Browns had sunk. It was going to be their start. Instead, it was their demise. And for Kody, the man who used to imagine laughter ringing out over those acres, the harsh reality must bite. Because in the silence of Coyote Pass, with only wind and dust, the truth is clear. The dream is gone, and no amount of wealth or drive can revive it. The Brown family constantly maintained that their journey was one of faith and love, but beneath the surface, it was money that provided the spark that made the dream continue. 4 homes meant 4 bills to pay, 4 mortgages, 4 grocery shopping lists, and a wealth of expenses most families could scarce believe. When the cameras were going and the paychecks were coming in, it seemed doable. The show paid for the dream, and the dream paid for the show. But as the marriages broke and allegiances changed, money became a battleground. Another open wound that never healed. The Coyote Pass story was to be their salvation. For years the Browns had drifted from state to state, Utah to Nevada, Nevada to Arizona. And now they wanted stability. They yearned for one location where the whole family could establish roots, construct homes, and ultimately live alongside each other. In 2018, they bought a huge piece of property in Flagstaff, Arizona, an expanse of open desert with mountains rising in the horizon. To Kody, it was a vision. He talked of constructing houses for both wives, of having a shared courtyard where their children and grandchildren would come together for generations. It wasn't land, it was the promise of togetherness. Promises are simple. Construction is difficult. Year after year, the land stayed empty. No houses were constructed, no foundations laid. The dream continued to be stuck in blueprints and disputes. Other wives were slow to put more money into a future that already seemed uncertain. Christine, in particular, confessed that she had no wish to reside on Coyote Pass, not when her own marriage was crumbling around her and her trust in Kody was lost. Janelle kept holding out longer, hoping the land might still be a new beginning. But even she's starting to lose her patience. Meri remained silent, wondering if her role in the family even warranted a place on the land. And Robyn became the focal point again. To most, it made sense that Robyn's house would be the first and largest if the land was ever built on. The land that was meant to be a symbol of harmony gradually became evidence of division. Coyote Pass meetings concluded in dispute. Financial talks became accusations. Some of the wives accused Kody of being irresponsible with money, of pursuing a dream no one else ever really believed in anymore. Kody, in turn, accused his wives of not having faith, of not wanting to invest in the future of their family. The more he pushed, the farther away they got. And the land, still and quiet, became a mirror for the truth. There was no unity to work on. Behind the scenes, financial trouble mounted. The show was lucrative, but dividing paychecks among many households sucked the money away fast. Doctors' bills, college fees, daily living, it all mounted. Some of the wives earned income to support themselves, earning separate incomes in order to stay alive. Janelle, being the practical one, was concerned with fiscal responsibility. Christine started building her own business ventures. Meri invested in her bed and breakfast, attempting to create a life beyond Kody. All the wives managed to find their own means of staying above water, but the independence only served to expose how broken the financial structure had become. What had been a single family budget now resembled 4 individual survival strategies. Viewers began to pick up on the fissures. They wondered why the land was lying idle, why Kody still talked of big dreams without anything ever materializing. Internet forums hummed with speculation. Some thought the Browns couldn't pay for construction. Others suspected Kody was dragging his feet, hoping that the vision of Coyote Pass would keep the wives bound to him a little while longer. For if they built adjacent homes, it would be so much more difficult to leave. For Christine, that was enough reason to leave. She didn't want to be stuck in a future she no longer had faith in. The most symbolic moment was when Kody himself stated that the land had become bitter. He had initially referred to it as the key to keeping the family together, but towards the end, it was evident it was only driving them further apart. Each time the subject arose, the past wounds reopened. Jealousy, partiality, and suspicion clouded any possibility of movement forward. Coyote Pass was not a dream anymore. It was a ghost, haunting the family with the possibilities of what might have been. Money has a tendency to reveal truths that people attempt to conceal. For the Browns, it showed that love wasn't sufficient to keep 4 families together. Not when there was not enough and priorities were unequal. Kody demanded loyalty. The wives demanded security. The children demanded stability. Nobody received what they desired. Rather, everyone sat and witnessed the dreams slide away from their hands, leaving nothing but abandoned bills and shattered promises. By the time Christine departed, the property was already lost. Janelle, who had been its biggest defender, even came to acknowledge she no longer envisioned a future there. Meri no longer had anything to fight for. And Robyn, though still technically in the running, now had standing on land that represented loss rather than potential. What had been bought as the cornerstone of their legacy was now a testament to failure. The collapse of Coyote Pass is one of the most obvious metaphors of the entire Brown family drama. They had envisioned a kingdom where everyone could live together. Kingdoms are constructed on trust. However, and trust had been shattered long before. Regardless of how many acres they possessed, regardless of how many blueprints Kody flashed in the air, nothing could eliminate the fact the family was already lost. And maybe that is why Coyote Pass is still vacant. Because you can't construct houses upon land afflicted with bitterness. You can't lay foundations on ground already shattered by distrust. You can't engender harmony where harmony has ceased to exist. To the fans, the property was a character in its own right, a silent observer to the family's disintegration. Every time it appeared in an episode, the viewers were reminded of what was lost. Each fight over it indicated how low the Browns had sunk. It was meant to be their starting point, but it turned out to be their downfall. And for Kody, the man who had dreamed of laughter ringing across those acres, the truth must hurt. Because in the stillness of Coyote Pass, with nothing but dust and wind, the truth cannot be denied. The dream is lost, and money and ambition cannot revive it. When the dust finally cleared, only two individuals stood together, Kody and Robyn. What had been a sprawling, chaotic household of 5 grown-ups and 18 kids had drawn down to a subdued, almost eerie form of monogamy. For years, Kody had railed against the narrowness of monogamy, declaring that plural marriage was a higher calling, a greater challenge of faith, a way of life that held out eternal rewards. And yet here he was, monogamous finally, not by preference, but by breakdown. To Kody, Robyn was his final friend, the sole one who never departed. She remained for him when Christine loaded up her belongings, when Janelle opted to be on her own, and when Meri conceded softly that the marriage was over. Robyn remained, and through remaining, she was both his solace and his prison. Kody hung all of himself on the loyalty of the one relationship he had remaining. For him, it was confirmation that he wasn't the issue, that love, true love, was still out there. But to the world at large, things were not so rosy. To others, it seemed like Kody had invested so much time in being favorably disposed toward Robyn that in the end, she was all that was left because she was the only one he ever actually fought for. It was not just emotional isolation. It was also physical. Where once surrounded by the noise and activity of homes filled with wives and children, Kody's world was now contained within one house. Holiday celebrations that were once noisy and joyous were quieter, emptier. The grand vision of Coyote Pass was now a fantasy that only he and Robyn continued to pretend to believe. Even reunions with the children felt tense, as so many of them stood apart, unwilling or unable to cross over. Robyn herself bore the burden of this new reality. She had envisioned herself as a sisterhood, as sharing life with other women who might be friends, as well as co-wives. But instead, she became identified as the cause of the family breakup. Viewers labeled her manipulative, accused of being the favorite, the wedge that split up the Browns. She cried on television, claiming she never wished to be the sole wife, never wished to see the others leave. And yet, by intention, or by mistake, that's precisely what occurred. There was something sad about Robyn's tears that even her detractors could not disregard. Yes, she had the love of Kody, but what was the value of that love if it came at the expense of a whole family? Rather than the vibrant plural marriage that she had once thought was possible, she was stuck with a damaged man, bitter and resentful, hanging on to her as if she were the last lifeline that held him up. Robyn had gained the marriage, but she'd lost the dream. Kody, on the other hand, appeared more bitter. He snapped at interviews, accusing his wives of betrayal, of deserting the values they had previously clung to. He spoke of Christine with contempt, denounced Meri as a cheater, and battled with Janelle over respect and loyalty. His words sketched a portrait of a man who could not take responsibility, could not see how his own behavior, his favoritism, his pride, his refusal to listen, had driven them all away. To fans, it was sad and infuriating at the same time. The man who used to talk about unity now sounded more like a man trying to excuse his own failures. What was left of the family connection thinned out more with each year. A few of the older kids openly acknowledged they had little or no relationship with their father anymore. Others just wouldn't talk, allowing the silence to speak volumes more than anything they might ever say. Family gatherings were smaller, calls fewer, and the erstwhile teeming family tree came to resemble scattered branches, divided by distance and bitterness. Robyn was Kody's whole universe, and he hers. But loneliness has a way of making imperfections enormous. Without the counterbalance of other relationships, without the distractions of a bigger family, all frustration and all insecurity between them became more burdensome. Kody's rage, his fixation on loyalty, his hurt pride, all of these now rested squarely on Robyn's shoulders. And even as she stood with him, the tension was evident. She wept frequently, complained of loneliness, and confessed that she had never wanted this to happen. She had come into the family expecting togetherness, but there had been a death of unity, and she was alone now with a man who seemed more upset with the world than ever before. In fans' eyes, viewing Kody and Robyn's loneliness was to witness a kingdom reduced to one crumbling castle. The great experiment that had enthralled millions was now brought down to two individuals huddled in a simple house, attempting to reassure themselves that it was still sufficient. Others regarded it as justice, the natural outcome of Kody's actions. Others regarded it as heartbreaking, a tale of two individuals who held on to one another so fiercely that they lost everybody else. Amidst the quiet of their new existence, one thing was certain: polygamy had not lifted Kody Brown. Polygamy had stripped him bare, strip by strip, until nothing was left but the very thing he rejected: monogamy. But this monogamy wasn't constructed upon happiness. It was constructed upon loss, anger, and ghosts of what had been. And that is the paradox of Kody and Robyn's love. It is unbreakable. To be sure, she remained when everyone else departed. Yet it is also fragile, tainted by the awareness that their marriage is both reason and result for so much suffering. Together they are, but alone, isolated from the family that previously identified them. The Brown narrative had always revolved around the question: is plural marriage possible? For years Kody assured us that it was, citing his family as evidence. But ultimately the response came not in words but in fact. The family is dissolved. The wives are lost. The children are estranged. And the only evidence remaining on its feet is a lone marriage, set against the backdrop of silence, haunted by regret. For the viewers, the picture of Kody and Robyn sitting by themselves is the last page of a very long, sad book. A man who was once the husband of four, now the husband of one. A woman who was once craving sisterhood, now left alone. Together but alone, winning but hollow. And maybe the most tragic of all is that this isn't the conclusion they desired. It's just the conclusion that they built. All stories have an end, and Kody Brown's story is no different. What started out as a daring exercise in love and religion has concluded in tragedy, fragmentation, and lessons that reverberate far outside the boundaries of one family. For years, Sister Wives was watched not only for entertainment but also because the Browns offered something more. A glimpse into something most people could not even begin to dream. A man with 4 wives, 18 kids. A family that defied society's definition of marriage and showed that love could be multiplied, not divided. But with the years went by, the cracks widened, and the reality came to light. It's easy to talk of multiplying love but nearly impossible to practice. Human hearts are vulnerable. Jealousy creeps in. Attention is diverted. And when love is unevenly shared, the whole foundation starts to collapse. Kody Brown once stood as the face of polygamy in America. He insisted it was about faith, about sacrifice, about building a kingdom of love. He spoke of fairness, of loyalty, of the joy of many voices blending into one family song. But as the cameras rolled, a different song played. A discordant melody of favoritism, loneliness, and neglect. Christine's tears, Mary's isolation, Janelle's independence, Robyn's guilt. They were all verses in the same tragic ballad. The end was not a dramatic blow, but a gradual disintegration. Christine went first, not willing to remain in a marriage where she was no longer loved. Janelle went next, weary of offering respect but never having it returned. Meri, waiting for years for a husband who had already begun to move on, finally conceded it was over. One by one, the pillars collapsed, until there was just Robyn left, holding on to a man who had promised eternity to 3 others. And so the polygamous family story did not conclude in togetherness, but in isolation. Kody, who once had 4 hands, now has but one. The man who sermonized against monogamy now practices monogamy, not out of conviction, but out of consequence. The man who envisioned Coyote Pass, homes side by side, resides in a solitary home with emptiness where laughter once abounded. For the wives, the conclusion has been both sweet and bitter. Christine smiles once more, demonstrating life can go on after heartbreak. Janelle holds strong, her self-sufficiency a point of pride. Meri, despite the damage done over years of solitude, moves towards new horizons. Each of them bears the wounds of the past, yet also the liberty of a future in which they are not determined by the decisions of one man. For the kids, the narrative is more complex. Some have withdrawn, talking frankly about the pain of being left behind. Others say nothing, and silently bear their scars. Their inheritance is not only the image of cameras and fame, but the burden of being raised in a family where love was one-sided and allegiance was continually tested. They are the real witnesses of this tale, those who will be taking it into the next generation, whether they will repeat it or turn it away. And as for Robyn, the conclusion is perhaps the most difficult of all. She has Kody's affection, yes, but she also bears the guilt. She is both the surviving wife and the most divisive character in the epic. Her tears indicate the weight of having been thought of as the cause for others to depart. Despite claiming she never desired this to happen. She desired a sisterhood, yet she lives alone. She desired unity, yet she experiences division. She won at the marriage, yet she lost the dream. In the end, nothing remains of the Brown family but not a kingdom, not a legacy of faith, not a beacon of plural love. What remains is a cautionary tale. A reminder that love cannot be stretched too thin. A warning that favoritism demolishes what fairness endeavors to construct. A truth that promises to many mean nothing if only one gets to have them in full. And maybe that's why the story has fascinated millions for over a decade. Because beneath the unique structure, beneath the polygamy and the faith, this was always a story about something universal. The need to be seen, the desire to be loved, the fear of being left behind. Whether in a marriage of 2, or a marriage of 4, the heart craves the same thing: equality, intimacy, devotion. When those things are stripped away, no building, no teaching, no vision can endure. The last chapter of Kody Brown's life is not one of victory, it is one of defeat. Defeat of trust, defeat of love, defeat of family. But it is one of survival as well. The women who walked away have proven that even after decades of sacrifice, it is never too late to reclaim your voice. Your kids, notwithstanding their suffering, keep forging their own lives, determined to make different futures from the past. And even Kody, with his fury and denial, serves as evidence that pride always has a cost. From husband of 4 to husband of 1. From a vision of oneness to a reality of separation. From a big family tree to dispersed branches, curving in other directions. Such is the tale of Kody Brown. And maybe that is exactly how it was always going to end. Because love, however it is arranged, cannot exist without equality. And equality was the one thing this family never really had. So when people look back on Sister Wives, they will not recall it as the tale of a man who created an empire. They will recall it as the tale of a man who lost one. And in that silence, in that void, the testament of Kody Brown is louder than any words he ever uttered.